Blessed be your name. The sun is shining down on me, and the world is all that it should be. Oh, blessed be your name. Blessed be your name on the road marked with suffering. And the world is all that it should be. Oh, blessed be your name. Oh, every blessing you pour out, I'll turn back to praise. When the darkness closes in, Lord, still I will say, oh, blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your glorious name. You give and take away. You give and take away. My heart will choose to say, Lord, blessed be your name. Every blessing you pour out, I'll turn back to praise. When the darkness closes in, Lord, still I will say, blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your name, Jesus. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your glorious name. Oh, blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your glorious name. Blessed be your name. Morning. Pick up my music. Blessed be your glorious name. Yes, I will rise, Lord, of these ashes rise. From this trouble I have found in the rubble on the ground, I will rise. 'Cause he who is in me is greater than I will ever be, and I will rise. Yes, he who is in me is greater than I will ever be, and I will rise. Sometimes my heart is on the ground, and hope is nowhere to be found. Love is a figment I once knew, yet I hold on to what I know is true. Yes, I will rise, Lord, of these ashes rise. From this trouble I have found in the rubble on the ground, I will rise. 'Cause he who is in me is greater than I will ever be, and I will rise. Oh, yes, he So I lay down my life and rose to die. That somehow I might rise. Yes, I will rise out of these ashes, rise from this trouble I have found in the rubble on the ground. I will rise. 'Cause he who is in me is greater than I will ever be, and I will rise.
Good morning. Happy Sunday. So glad you guys are all here, and I'm so glad you guys chose to come and join us today and connect with each other and to connect with God. So first thing I want to do is, can you bring up the announcement slides? Good morning. Happy Sunday. So glad you guys are all here, and I'm so glad. There we go. This is the results of our annual business meeting. Linda Smetzer is our church clerk. Stephen Corley is our church treasurer. Our budget passed. And our new board members are Liz Bonet, Sandy Schmidt, and Lauren Haas. So I wanted to let you know that. I know some of you don't get social media that gives you this information, so I want to make sure that everyone is aware that that is the results of our annual business meeting. And I did get a text from Pastor Pete last Sunday saying, how did it go? So he does keep in contact. If you're visiting for the first time, our senior pastor is on a sabbatical leave. He'll be gone for 3 months. If you want to know more about a sabbatical leave, there's a flyer back at the back table. You can pick it up and it'll give you more information about why he is taking this break and what is happening at CrossWalk while that happens. So just want to share that with you, but he is still in contact with me with things going on. They did just do some state park stuff going on. So he was grateful to be able to have that time to be able to do that. And also, I want to remind you that we have the green bottles in the back that for Change, we are collecting change for the kids in the slums of Nairobi, Kenya. We encourage everyone to do this between Mother's Day and Father's Day. You can take one of the jars with you and bring it back when it's full, dump it in the jug and take it back and fill it again. If you don't have change, because I know there is a change shortage, I promise you we're getting the change back out there, so to help with that. But we do take paper money or plastic money as well. So if you fill that jar with pennies, you will provide fresh water for 1 month, equivalent to $5. If you fill it with nickels, you will feed 160 children for $20. And if it's dimes, 400 children will eat for $50. Quarters is 800 children. That's $100. And if you fill it with love, you will be changing the world, and that's priceless. So just want to remind you that we're doing that, and we've already gotten quite a bit. I had to give Haley a heads up because we rolled all the coins this week. So she's probably going to have to take a couple journeys into the bank to get it in there. So it'll be great. It'll get sent over there to the kids in Nairobi. And then also want to remind you that we're still collecting funds for Ukraine. So in the little tubs on the table, there is an envelope, 1 great hour sharing, and you can put some funds in there. The money we send over goes directly to the missionaries that are serving over there. And so just want to tell you, it is a safe place that you can help support what's going on in Ukraine over there. And then also Operation with Love from Home. You may have seen the box when you came in. They're going to be collecting from May 1st until June 6th. And it's for the care packages that they send to the troops for 4th of July. Next slide. Also Operation with Love from Home. There you go. This is when it's going to be. It's going to be here at CrossWalk in the gym. They've decided to come back and do it here again. It will be from 9:30 until 1 o'clock. Check-in starts at 9:30. Event begins at 10. They are inviting the public to come and join, help put together the boxes. So you literally pick up a box at one end and you just go down the table, getting one item and putting in the box. Get to the very end and there's a team that packs it all down in and tapes it up. So if you want to help with that, you can. The most needed items is on the next slide. I know it's hard to see this, but I just wanted to make sure this goes out. If you get the CrossWalk connection, this will also be on there. It's our email that we send out. I usually send it on Saturdays now because it has a link to be able to sign on to YouTube and Zoom. So we have a lot of people that are on Zoom and YouTube this morning, and we got that figured out. So just wanted you to know that if you can find any of these good deals and you want to bring it in and put it in the box in the lobby, and then they come and pick them up and they make sure they get out to the troops. So just want to remind you about that. And then other items that we collect here at CrossWalk, people keep asking me, are you still collecting this or that? Next slide. Box in the lobby, and then they come and pick them up and they make sure they get out to the troops. So just want to remind you. We have someone new on the computer today, so thank you for helping us up there, Candace. We are collecting grocery store bags. They use them back in our food pantry along with egg cartons. The aluminum pull tabs, you know, the little pull tabs off of your soup or cat food or beer or soda, whatever. We collect those. Those go to the Ronald McDonald House. We collect ink or toner cartridges. We use those here at CrossWalk. I take them to Office Depot. I get $2 for each one, and that's how I've been buying all of our office supplies. So if you got a chance to look at the extended budget, you'll see we don't spend a lot in office supplies. That's because I use everybody's toner cartridges. The other thing we collect is the hotel toiletries, your little shampoos and all that stuff. I never use what they have there, but I grab it, throw it in my suitcase, and I bring it back. We send those to the troops. And then also the change for change. So those are the items that we are still collecting here at CrossWalk. So I just wanted to share that with you. And then I also want to thank you for all that you do, for your prayers, your patience, your financial support of CrossWalk. CrossWalk is not CrossWalk without your assistance and without your support. And we are so grateful that you do support us here at CrossWalk, because we are completely dependent on your donations to keep us going. The other thing I do want to remind you that if you have any suggestions or any comments, while Pete's gone or even while he's here, there's little note papers in those buckets on the table. You can write them out and fill them in the other, put them in the little bucket. We would love to hear your suggestions or your comments or anything that you think that would help improve things around here, or just a praise, like Jennifer not missing a beat when she dropped her music this morning. So that was pretty awesome. So yeah, I just want to thank you all. And now, Gordon, would you like to come up and lead us in meditation? Things around here, or just a praise, like Jennifer.
Thank you, Dar.
Missing a beat when she dropped her music.
Hey, everyone. Don't you look great today? Okay, so on today's meditation, this is something that we've done before as a congregation, but while we're sitting here and while we're breathing in and out like we do with every meditation, I'm gonna throw in kind of just a simple hand gesture that goes along with that. So when we breathe in, if you can just rest two hands like on your lap or on the table, wherever is most comfortable for you. When you breathe in, your palms are gonna be facing up. And every time you breathe out, I just want you to turn them over and have your palms facing down. So go ahead and get yourself comfortable. Go ahead and close your eyes. Breathe in, your palms are going to be facing up. And just start to breathe deeply. I want you to turn them over. As we breathe in, facing down. Their palms facing up. We breathe out with our palms facing down. Again, in, and out. And if distractions come up while you're breathing in and out, just let them come in and let them go out. Just return to this rhythm of your breath. And now as we're breathing, I want you to kind of repeat this mantra. As we're breathing in, I want you to think to yourself, more of you. And as we breathe out, less of me. As we breathe in, more of you. And as we breathe out, less of me. And as we breathe in, I want you to start to visualize a light that is the love of God entering the palms of your hands. And as you turn your hands over, I want you to visualize what is the weight that God is asking you to let go of. So breathe in, and we breathe out. More of you, less of me. And as you visualize this love of God entering the palms of your hands, as you breathe in? Does it have a color? Maybe it's a blue, cooling color to ease the pain in your life. Maybe it's a warm, nurturing color. More of you, less of me. And I want you to imagine now this color starting to fill your body. It's entering through your hands and is now coursing through your entire body, this radiant, beautiful love of God. More of you and less of me. And I want you to imagine that you are completely full of this love of God. Do you see the color that now radiates from you? Battery's gonna die soon. So go ahead and open your eyes. We have one more song, Jennifer.
The splendor of the King, clothed in majesty. Let all the earth rejoice. Let all the earth rejoice. He wraps himself in light, and darkness tries to hide, and trembles at his voice, trembles at his voice. How great is our God? Sing with me, how great is our God? And all will see how great is our God. And age to age he stands, and time is in his hands, beginning and the end, beginning and the end. The Godhead three in one, Father, Spirit, Son, the Lion and the Lamb, the Lion and the Lamb. How great is our God? Sing with me, how great is our God? And all will see how great is our God. Name above all names, worthy of all praise. My heart will sing how great is our God. How great is our God? Sing with me, how great is our God? And all will see how great is our God.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. All right. So for those of us who haven't met, my name's Gordon Wagoner. I've been coming here with my wife, Ann, since 2009 when I first moved to Napa. When Pete asked me to do this interview this morning, I was super excited because Pete has told me a lot of wonderful things about our guest this morning. And our guest is Rabbi Niles Goldstein. And I'm going to read you his bio from his own website because it's really cool. As a rabbi and a writer, Niles hopes to reach the seekers, dreamers, questioners, and strugglers among us who are tired of the status quo and who crave a bolder, more authentic approach to life, particularly in the spiritual arena. Through his books, articles, and teachings, he always strives to face the challenges of the human journey head on and to learn whatever lessons those trials might offer us. His own quest for spiritual authenticity has taken him dog sledding in Alaska and skydiving in New Zealand. As it expressed itself in his longtime practice of the martial arts, it has led to the creation of a new and innovative synagogue in Manhattan's Greenwich Village, and it has now brought him to Northern California to lead Congregation Beth Shalom here in Napa Valley. He invites us to join him on the journey because it's going to be an interesting ride. This sounds like a guy I want to talk to. Please welcome to the stage, Rabbi Niles Goldstein. So Rabbi Niles and I had a brief kind of phone conversation when we were setting this up, and we discovered that we had some really cool things in common. So I thought I would go ahead and start there. We've both lived in New York. We've both lived in the Village, and we both lived in a very specific neighborhood in Brooklyn called Park Slope, which if you've never been to Park Slope in Brooklyn, it looks like the Cosby Show. It's like brownstones everywhere. It's a really lovely neighborhood. I lived on President Street, and where were you?
I lived in, first of all, thank you all for having me this morning, and thank you. I was looking forward to this as well. I lived in 3 different locations during the 20 years I lived in Park Slope, Brooklyn. I don't even remember all of them, but they were on number streets, not name streets like yours. I had to look up
where I lived too. Yeah, right. This was back in the 90s, so I'm dating myself, but yeah. So how long ago did you come to Napa?
I moved to Napa 5 years ago. Okay. I left New York in 2010, and I moved back to Chicago, which is where I'm from. During the time I was in Chicago, which wound up being about 7 years, I worked at the Parliament of the World's Religions, a major interfaith organization. I taught at Loyola University, a great Jesuit school, right. Very appropriate for a Reform rabbi. And I even had a stint as a writer at Edelman, which is a big PR agency. Oh, so I did some part-time rabbinic work when I was there, but I was in the throes of a full-blown midlife crisis, which I write about in one of my books. Right. And it was only after about 7 years of wrestling with what I wanted to do next in my life that I heard about the opportunity here, applied for it, and then was accepted as the next rabbi here at Congregation Beth Shalom. So I moved here in this almost exactly 5 years ago.
Gotcha. So we're going to have just kind of like this. We're going to have a discussion over a series of topics that kind of Niles and I have gone over. But one of the great things that I realized, and it's kind of cool for us, is that Rabbi Niles has written like 10 books, 4 of which are available for sale. If you want to learn more about what the rabbi's about, what he writes about, we'll talk about this in the back. But they're $10 a piece, just kind of like all of our books are. And they're really interesting themes that we'll touch on as we go through things. So really briefly, just quick show of hands, how many of you have ever been to temple? Okay, there's a handful of us, cool. How many of you ever went to a bat or a bar mitzvah growing up? Okay, so kind of the same people, all right. So I think it's probably important for us to start off with kind of a brief overview of kind of what Judaism is, because I think oftentimes in Christian traditions, we kind of define Judaism as the Old Testament, and that's kind of it. And Pete talks a little bit about rabbinical tradition here and has talked a little bit about the Talmud and Midrash, but I kind of wanted you to have the opportunity to kind of define how you view Judaism and how it might be different from just the Old Testament.
And you want me to do it in like 30 seconds, right?
It doesn't have to be 30 seconds, briefly.
Yeah.
It's a start of a conversation.
No, it's a great question. And I welcome the opportunity, because what I have seen in my career is that many folks in the Christian community, particularly in the evangelical world, often think of Judaism or Jews either as these biblical figures wandering through the desert of Sinai, or as Pharisees from the New Testament. And of course, Jews living today are neither of those things, although we do owe some of our identity to both of those things. So you're right. The Jews, as depicted in what Christians would call the Old Testament, or what I would call the Hebrew Bible, were a very different kind of demographic than, let's say, me or my congregation. The Jews of the Bible did introduce ethical monotheism to the world, but the way that they worshiped God, the way that that covenant, that loving bond, that relationship between God and the people of Israel was expressed, was through the tabernacle, through animal sacrifice, and through the priesthood. It was a very different way of worshiping and of gathering as a community than what we have today. Mm-hmm. It really wasn't until the people of Israel entered the land of Canaan, settled what is now Israel, and built a permanent temple. First, the first temple that was destroyed by the Babylonians, right, about 2,600 years ago, and then the second temple that was destroyed by the Romans about 2,000 years ago. Judaism really went through a metamorphosis after the second temple was destroyed by the Romans. This is right around the time of Jesus, who was a Jew, and I think we may be touching on that. Yeah. But once the second temple was destroyed, that ancient way of being a Jew was obliterated. First of all, there was no more temple to make these pilgrimages to in Jerusalem. Animal sacrifice was no longer a viable way of expressing Jewish identity or the bond with God. And third of all, there was no priesthood. It was wiped out. The Romans slaughtered, hundreds, thousands of them, along with many others. And there was a great diaspora. And Jews were spread all over the world. And that has continued over the centuries, for better and for worse. But I would say that around that time, when the Romans destroyed the temple, we had a whole new movement emerge known as Rabbinic Judaism. And so a whole set of teachers, rabbis, my predecessors, an office that didn't exist during the biblical period, they now became the new leaders of the Jewish people. So you no longer needed a priest. You no longer needed an intermediary between you and God. The rabbis became the leaders of the community, the religious leaders of the community, but they were teachers, they were scholars, they were writers, they were educators. They did not have a priestly function. So a very important book was developed in the 2nd and 3rd century called the Mishnah, which was essentially an interpretation of the Bible to try to make it more relevant and meaningful to people living at that time. Then in Babylonia, another place where many Jews lived after the Romans destroyed the temple, they created another work called the Talmud. And the Talmud was essentially a commentary on the Mishnah. And that whole tradition over the centuries of commentary and interpretation and reinterpretation has really brought us to where we are right now. Mm-hmm. So in some ways, you could say that the Jews living today owe much more to the rabbis of 2,000 years ago than they do to the Jews who lived during the biblical period, because the religion that we practice today looks much more like the tradition that was developed, in the 1st and 2nd centuries of the Common Era. Right. And you could argue that Judaism today is really a tradition of commentary and interpretation, and not a tradition of doctrine or dogma. I like to say that Judaism is a religion of dialogue, not a religion of doctrine.
Right. As we're discussing things, you may have questions that come up. If you want to go ahead and jot those down, we'll open the floor up for questions for Rabbi Nas to answer at the end. So feel free to make a note. As you know, within Christianity, we have we have denominations, we have Catholicism, we have Orthodoxy. In kind of broad strokes, Judaism kind of breaks down into kind of Orthodox or Reform or conservative. Kind of what in basic terms are the differences between those three groups?
Good question. I would say up until modernity, up until the Enlightenment, there was just sort of this amorphous general Jewish religion, and different nationalities, different groups, whether you were an Eastern European Jew or a Jew who lived in North Africa or Spain and Portugal or Iran or Iraq, you expressed that religion in a little bit of a different way. For example, on Passover, when we eat matzah and don't have leavening in our food, in our grain, Jews of Eastern Europe did not eat rice or beans. Jews in Spain and Portugal did eat rice and beans. Those are very minor customs, but those were not fundamental differences in terms of the way we viewed our religion. With modernity, with the ideas of the Enlightenment, which focused on the importance of individual autonomy and reason, and said that we shouldn't just practice our tradition because we inherited it, we should also think about it, critique it, analyze it, maybe reshape it. And so at that point, Reform Judaism began in Germany, probably in the 18th century, 18th and 19th centuries. That eventually came over to the United States in opposition to Reform Judaism, which was a much more forward-thinking, liberal way of being Jewish that was critical of some of the traditions that said wearing a head covering, observing the dietary laws, and I'm going back to early Reform Judaism. Reform Judaism itself has evolved over time. They said, those things may obstruct our relationship with God rather than help our relationship with God.
Right.
Then you had an opposition to Reform. Orthodoxy emerged. And then after Orthodoxy, you found that there were Jews who wanted a middle ground. And then you had conservative Judaism. And then since then, we've had Reconstructionist Judaism and secular humanist Judaism, that has a prayer book that omits any reference to God. So we have a lot of different movements within Judaism or denominations. Right. But Reform was really the first. And then lots of other ones emerged after that. And they reflect differences in theology. They reflect differences in institutional structure. They reflect differences in the way that our rabbis are trained. And they reflect differences in our practice, and our level of commitment to traditional practices. So in some ways, they're similar to the difference that happened during the Protestant Revolution, but I don't think the differences are as radical as what happened in Christianity.
Right.
And there was no war. I mean, I'm not an expert on the period, but I know there was war at that time and bloodshed. Luckily, even though there are profound differences of opinion between, let's say, Orthodox Jews and Reform Jews, we haven't yet taken up arms against each other.
Right.
But sadly, that violence, has happened a little bit in Israel, but not anything to the extent of what happened during the Reformation and the Counter-Reformation.
Right. As you mentioned, as we all know, Jesus was a Jew, and Christianity obviously has some serious Jewish roots. And we recently celebrated Easter not too long ago, but that holiday is actually kind of based around that, and communion are both kind of based around Passover and the Seder in a way. And so I really, has anyone ever been to a Seder? Okay, more folks have been. That's awesome. I kind of wanted to talk about the tradition of the Seder because through the diaspora that you mentioned, these traditions, these kind of household traditions, are such an important part of Jewish culture and Jewish identity. So what first, what is Passover? I think we all know what that is, but briefly, kind of what is Passover and what is the celebration of the Seder, the ceremony of the Seder?
Well, I mean, you're right. Jesus was a Jew. Many people think he was the first Reformed Jew and never even intended for there to be another religion based on his personality and his teachings. But that's a debate for another time. And I actually do teach a course called The Jewish Roots of Jesus. And there's some really interesting teachings in the New Testament where Jesus conveys just how steeped in the Jewish tradition he really was.
That's something that Pete references pretty
Does he?
frequently. Yeah.
I mean, for example, the 7 last words he utters are taken directly from Psalm 22, and they're Aramaic, which was the language of the time. Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, my God, why have you forsaken me? That's taken, directly from Psalm 22. Right. So he was certainly familiar with Judaism, and he would have been familiar with Passover. Passover, to your question, is one of the 3 ancient pilgrimage festivals in Judaism, the other 2 being Sukkot, the Feast of Booths, and Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks, which we're going to be celebrating in about a week or so. And it commemorates and celebrates the Exodus from Egypt, when the Jewish people were freed by God and Moses from slavery under Pharaoh. In the Torah itself, in the Bible itself, it only says we need to do it, and it's a week-long festival. In antiquity, it was observed, as I said earlier, with animal sacrifice, by making pilgrimages from all over the ancient Near East to the temple in Jerusalem. That all changed, of course, as I said earlier, when the Romans destroyed the temple and wiped out the priesthood. But other than the sacrifices associated with it, at the time, as the Bible says in the book of Exodus, the only 3 things you need to do are eat unleavened bread. Anyone know what that's called? Unleavened bread? Matzah. Thank you. Good. Some Jews don't even know what that is, although we may have some Jews here too. I don't know. Eat unleavened bread, eat bitter herbs. In Hebrew, they're called maror, and also eat the Paschal lamb, which was often a sacrifice. It's only much later, probably around the intertestamental period when Jesus was around, that the Seder as we know it today started to emerge. When you have a kind of liturgy known as the Haggadah, or the telling. It's a book. Those of you who have been at a Passover Seder, have you ever read from the Haggadah or the Haggadah? So it's sort of like a little booklet, but that's the liturgy, and there are all sorts of rituals connected to that. There's a Seder plate. Seder in Hebrew simply means order. It's the ritual or the order of the observance. So you sit around a table, you have a festive meal. There are different objects on the Seder plate that represent that are symbols of different themes, like rebirth, freedom, bitterness, celebration, etc. You drink 4 glasses of wine. Here my Napa Valley congregation loves that. You drink 4 glasses of wine during the Seder, and there are many other rituals connected to it. Now, whether the Seder during Jesus's time looked like that, or whether it looked more like the biblical observance of Passover, nobody can tell. Nobody knows. Right. And from what I've read, there's a lot of scholarly debate about whether his Last Supper, in fact, even was a Passover Seder. Right. A lot of people think the Passover Seder was based in many ways on the Greek symposium. And the Greek symposium was a kind of academic meal where Greeks would sit around a table and they would debate, they would study, they would talk about different ideas while they'd have this festive meal. And I think there's probably a lot of truth to that Hellenistic culture probably did influence what the Seder looks like today. So that's kind of what the Seder is today. It looks very different than the Seder in the Bible. There was no Seder in the Bible. There was no 4 cups of wine. There was no Seder plate. Like a lot of the Jewish tradition, it has evolved and changed over the centuries. What Jesus knew about it, I don't know. And what it looked like during his time, I don't know. And whether that actually was his Last Supper or not, I don't know. Right. But he certainly would have known what Passover was, right, living in Jerusalem. Sure. At least for part of his life. Right. One of the more recent
things that I've heard about in terms of like the evolution of the Seder within like the Reform movement is the addition of an orange.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that, which I found fascinating?
Yeah, there are, as I said, various objects on the Seder plate. One of them is a big ceremonial cup called the Cup of Elijah. Elijah, the prophet, really represents in some ways the harbinger of the Messianic age. So there's, you open the door to symbolically let Elijah enter your home all over the world. He has a busy night on Passover, sort of like Santa Claus on Christmas Eve. So you open the door symbolically and Elijah comes in to represent the Messianic hope that Jews all long for during Passover, when all of us will be free, Jew and Gentile, people of all races and creeds. Many years ago, maybe not so many, but several years ago, a feminist Jewish thinker decided to add an orange on the Seder plate because some more conservative Jew male, supposedly, this is apocryphal, who knows if it actually even happened, said, it had to do with the role of women in Judaism, or women being ordained as rabbis.
Mm-hmm.
And women in the Reform movement weren't ordained until, actually, we're celebrating their 50-year anniversary this year.
Mm-hmm.
In Orthodoxy, women still are not allowed to be rabbis, but in every other denomination they are. And he said something like, the day that women are allowed to be rabbis is the day that there will be an orange on the Seder plate. And now a lot of people put oranges on their Seder plate just to make the point that, there's a place for women at the table,
right?
Literally and figuratively.
Yeah. And
so that's when it started.
Right. And then in a culture, I thought that was fascinating, because in a culture that is so steeped in religion and in tradition, to have something as radical as that just kind of threw me for a loop.
Yeah, it was a bold, audacious kind of statement. And a lot of people do that now.
Right. That's awesome.
Can I just say one thing about the Passover Seder?
Sure.
And I've spoken about and led mock seders in other Christian communities. One thing that is troubling to me and to other Jewish leaders around the world is that there has been, on the one hand, it's good that Christians have begun exploring the Jewish roots of Jesus and of Christianity itself. That, I think, is all to the good. And I think that helps interfaith relations, where we see some of the values and ideas and beliefs that we share in common. And there are a great many that we do in all three of the Abrahamic traditions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam.
Mm-hmm.
But there seems to be a little bit of cultural appropriation that has been going on. And I've seen it more in the evangelical world, where Christians will observe a Seder but completely reinterpret the meaning behind it, so that it is no longer about the historical exodus from Egypt,
right,
and the liberation of the Jewish people. And it becomes, the symbols get reinterpreted, I would say warped, misinterpreted, and they start to prefigure, the birth of Jesus, the resurrection of Jesus, and all kinds of teachings that seem pretty way off to me. And that's a trend I've seen, again, more in the evangelical world, that is troubling. And I think a lot of people today are concerned about cultural appropriation, whether it's taking Native American traditions and sort of misinterpreting them and using them for our own purposes, or other cultural or religious traditions. So it's just something, if you ever see a Seder being done in a Christian context, I would just be wary of that, because it's something that I think is not really authentic, and that smacks of cultural appropriation.
Right. And the tradition itself is so incredibly specific.
It's very specific.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It would be like me taking, I know this is an American Baptist congregation, but it would be like me taking, doing communion, a Catholic communion, celebrating the Eucharist at a synagogue, and completely reinterpreting, what it means.
Right.
It just doesn't make sense.
Right. It's that specific. Yeah. I wanted to move on into, these 10 books that you've written. And as I was reading kind of the synopses of each one, there were two kind of major recurring themes that I saw kind of come up in your writings. One was that you consistently talk about like the wisdom that is relevant today in ancient scriptures that you find. Mm-hmm. And then the second, which is even more cool and fascinating to me, is how you seem to have made a deliberate search to find God through really cool experiences. And so I wanted to talk to you about kind of those two ideas that have seemed to come up and recurring themes throughout your writing.
Mm-hmm. Well, in terms of the first point, there is a lot of powerful stuff in the Hebrew scriptures, mm-hmm. whether we interpret them literally or not. And most, if not all people in my tradition don't interpret Torah literally, but more figuratively. One of the things I've tried to do in my career as a rabbi and with the different congregations I've served, most notably with the synagogue in New York, the New Shul that I founded, and I was the rabbi for 11 years, and now here in Napa, where I've been the rabbi for 5 years. I think one of the things Jews need to do a better job of, and I write about it in one of my books called Gonzo Judaism, is reclaim some of those lost traditions. For example, I think the idea of resurrection is an incredibly powerful idea. Mm-hmm. But the idea of resurrection, the idea of being born again, the idea of having your soul renewed sounds like a very Christian idea, but it's not. Mm-hmm. It is embedded in the Torah, and it is embedded in many of the rituals of early Judaism. And so I've tried to convey that to a lot of people in my community. If you find that idea very powerful, that one chapter of your life has to kind of die or come to a close before you can be reborn again. I mean, I've been through a divorce. Mm-hmm. I've experienced loss. I've had professional struggles. That's a powerful idea, to think that, you need to close one door before the next one opens. We have the ritual of the mikveh. It's where the baptism comes from. Mm-hmm. These ancient ritual baths I've seen all over the world, where a Jew immerses him or herself into them and sort of spiritually washes away his or her sins before beginning the next day or the next experience. When I lived in Jerusalem for 2 years, and 1 year I would go to the local mikveh, the local ritual bath, every single Friday afternoon to cleanse myself before I would go to services on Friday night. So I found it very, very powerful. That's a resurrection ritual. Mm-hmm. Or some of the teachings in the Bible, Moses going down to Egypt, the Jewish people going down, Joseph and his brothers, to Egypt before coming out again and rising to the land of Canaan after the Exodus. The idea of the prophet Jonah, and we read about him on the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the Jewish year. The prophet we read expresses that idea of renewal and resurrection. He goes down to the city of Tarshish. He goes down into the hold of a ship. He goes down into the Mediterranean Sea before he rises up again, mm-hmm. To fulfill his mission. So there are lots of those ideas of figures in the Bible going down before rising up. To me, that's a metaphor for renewal and resurrection. So I like to look at the Jewish tradition and find some of our beautiful teachings that are very powerful, that have been influential on other religious traditions, and reclaim them for ourselves. Mm-hmm. And instead of saying, well, resurrection is a Christian idea, sin and forgiveness are Christian ideas, grace and compassion, that's the Christian God, that's not the Jewish God, that's not correct. Mm-hmm. And so I've made a career of trying to correct these false beliefs, both among Jews and Christians, about our tradition, because there's so much great material there that we've lost. Right. Partly because we have, for better or worse, wanted to distinguish ourselves from Christianity, and partly just out of ignorance. And so that's something I've really wanted to bring back. And I'll address the other thing unless you were going to jump in.
No. Yeah.
And in terms of
so the experiences thing is super cool to me because like you did like dog sledding in Alaska. You traveled the Silk Road without a visa, which I thought was really cool experience. I want to know more about that. Spent a night in the tombs in New York and tooling around with like a DEA agent. And so I'm very interested to know what were you searching for when you set out on these kind of radical experiences, and what did you end up finding?
Well, you and I have had a brief couple of conversations. I can already tell we're cut from the same cloth. We're both seekers and strugglers. Yeah. And certainly when I was a younger man and a younger rabbi, I struggled. I was a seeker. And for me, at least at that time, maybe a little less so now, I feel a little more at peace with my soul than I did when I was younger. But I looked for God. I looked for purpose. I looked for spirituality in pretty unconventional areas, not necessarily in a house of worship, not necessarily through normative prayer or practice. And in one of my books back there, it's called God at the Edge, Searching for the Divine in Uncomfortable and Unexpected Places. I describe some of the experiences I've had. I did go on a dog sledding trip, a couple of dog sledding trips with a friend of mine who's a professional wilderness guide in Alaska. And those were grueling. I mean, I don't know if anyone's ever been dog sledding, but if you go dog sledding, especially in the Arctic, and you have to put up a tent every night and find wood and melt snow and feed the dogs and feed yourself and stay warm, that doesn't seem at the surface like it's going to be a very spiritual experience. But I write about how I had some profound and life-altering moments during those trips, including one night when I went out to go to the bathroom at a nearby river, and I saw the northern lights that looked like they were maybe 10 feet in front of me. Or during a different trip to Alaska, when I did some backcountry hiking and I ran into a grizzly, a young adult grizzly that probably wasn't much further away from me than you are in the last table in the back of the room. And I talk about how that experience of raw elemental fear also was a profoundly important spiritual experience, because it taught me about awe, and it taught me about the value that a sense of one's own mortality can bring. You know, that gave me a kind of wisdom and perspective on my life that I don't think any book ever would have been able to do. Right. Or in the early 90s, after the Soviet Union fell apart, I created a sort of Jewish humanitarian mission. And I worked with an NGO, and I brought books and medicine and religious articles to different Jewish communities in some far-flung regions of the Jewish world. You know, most people think of Jews as living in, cosmopolitan areas, big cities, but there are Jews all over the world. And some now and during that time live in very difficult conditions, and anti-Semitism is real. We all know that. We're going to probably talk about that too, even here in Napa. And I went to the newly independent countries in Central Asia of Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and Kyrgyzstan. And I went to these different communities and brought this material to them and tried to do some teaching. And, they had been oppressed for 70 years under the Soviet Union. It was just brutal. And they were only beginning to very carefully start to embrace the religious tradition. And as a young rabbi, I think I was in my final year of rabbinical school, so I wasn't even ordained yet. I was still a seminarian. I was trying to teach them and help them. And I remember one really powerful moment that I write about in one of my books, where I went to this cemetery nearby and helped a young man who had just lost his mother, and he was just shattered. And there's a Jewish prayer known as the Kaddish that you say when you want to honor the memory of a loved one. And I helped him to say that, and we were all in tears. But I did not have the right paperwork. I did not have a visa. It was the Wild West. You have to read my books if you want to get the whole story. But I was faced with either scrapping the whole mission or going illegally. And I was living in New York at the time, and I decided to go illegally because I was young and stupid. And I flew to Moscow. And I had, duffel bags filled with medicine and books. And then I flew from Moscow to Almaty, which is the capital of Kazakhstan. And I had all kinds of crazy adventures.
I got to warn you, my dad's going to buttonhole you after church because we're talking about Kazakhstan.
Oh, you are? Okay.
Yeah.
Fascinating place. And anyway, I traveled through those 3 countries, had a bunch of adventures. And by the end, someone turned me in to the KGB. And there was a knock at the door of one of the homes I was staying at, and I was interrogated. And I was basically scared to death and had visions of the movie Midnight Express, if anyone's ever seen that. And I wound up getting kicked out of Uzbekistan, and eventually I made it back to New York. But I have had a lot of sort of unconventional and uncomfortable experiences, which I've written about in my books, particularly God at the Edge. And you mentioned spending a night in the tombs. The irony, I work as a chaplain with the Napa Police Department now. I also work with the FBI as a chaplain. But back then, I was a young and angry man, and I wound up destroying some property at a nightclub. And I spent a night in jail in New York. And that was a scary, but also a very fascinating experience. And the basic thesis of that book is that even when you're in the muck and mire of the human condition, and things feel challenging and uncomfortable and difficult, you can still find God in that place.
Right.
And sometimes you're even more likely to find God in that place. You know the expression, there are no atheists in foxholes?
Right.
I don't know if we have any former military here.
We do. We have several. Yeah.
And I was a chaplain in the reserves for a while in the Army. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. Sometimes, ironically, we can find spirituality and we can grow more from life's more discomforting experiences than from the warm and fuzzy. Mm-hmm. And that's really been my approach.
Right.
So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. So the God that you found in those experiences,
mm-hmm.
was that God different from the one you thought you would find?
Excellent question. I think the God I experience, I noticed there, and I was surprised to see a song about it that specifically mentions the Trinitarian nature of God, because I thought, low church, Baptist congregations didn't focus much on the Trinity as much as Orthodox Christianity, Catholicism, et cetera. But I'm sure that's a part of any Christian tradition. In Judaism too, and in the Bible and in Rabbinic Judaism, there are many different conceptions of God. Mm-hmm. God is sometimes depicted as male. God is sometimes depicted as female. God is sometimes depicted as a man of war. God is sometimes depicted as a nurturing mother. God is sometimes depicted as transcendent and mysterious outside of us. God is sometimes depicted as immanent and within us. So there are many different conceptions of God, which means there are many different ways we can relate to God. So I would say that yes, the God I experienced when I was in jail, or the God I experienced when I saw the Northern Lights on a dog sledding trip in Alaska, was a different kind of a God than a God I experienced in a loving relationship, or when I'm engaged in prayer at the synagogue. But to be really honest with you, I would say in my career, the truly spiritual experiences I've had have probably more often occurred in some of those more dramatic experiences than in a conventional house of worship. Mm-hmm. I've had more of those as I've gotten older, but that's been a little harder for me. And I know it's hard for a lot of people. Right. A lot of us don't necessarily have these peak experiences where our lives are transformed during a Sunday morning service. Sometimes we need to be in nature, mm-hmm. or we need to experience the birth of a child, or whatever it is.
Right.
But I think you can experience God through almost anything. And whether we have different names for God or different ways of conceiving of God, I think because of that, our relationships with God, ebb and flow. Mm-hmm. And I think that's true whether you're a Jew or a Christian or a Muslim or probably anybody.
Right. So kind of one last little topic, but it's kind of a heavy one, at least it'll start off heavy. As part of as part of this diaspora that's happened, in the Jewish culture over time, unfortunately, hand in hand with that has been anti-Semitism, as you mentioned. And I think it's important to note that, when we talk about anti-Semitism, we always think about the Holocaust first for obvious reasons. But it's also important to note that I think that anti-Semitism is found throughout the world,
even before Christianity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there's Jewish ghettos and ancient cities all over the world. And unfortunately, it's something that you've had personal experience with your congregation over the last year.
Yeah.
Here in Napa. And so I wanted you to kind of share with the congregation what it was that happened most recently, because it's not the only incident that's happened. And what happened, kind of the reaction of your congregation, the reaction of the community, and then perhaps most importantly, what we can do as a congregation, what we can do as your brothers and sisters, kind of help support you and our fellow Jewish brothers and sisters.
Thank you. Yeah, anti-Semitism is a problem that ebbs and flows over time. It's been around for millennia, and it does predate Christianity, even though the Holocaust in some ways represents the most horrific and dark apex of anti-Semitism. There was Hellenistic anti-Semitism, there was Islamic anti-Semitism, there's a lot. And we're seeing it now in Europe. We're seeing it in Eastern Europe, Western Europe, Eastern Europe. We're seeing it in the United States, in North America. And we're seeing it even more now in this very politically charged, polarized environment in which we live. And I won't get too political right now, but I think a huge part of it is we've had a lot of leaders in this country who've allowed it to fester, or, and I'm being polite, or who've really looked the other way in the face of white nationalism and extremism. And anti-Semitism and racism and Islamophobia are always interconnected with white nationalism and some of those groups. A few months ago, right here in Napa, we woke one morning and near Fuller Park, I don't know if anyone lives in the Old Town area, but right near where the synagogue is, and on sidewalks throughout the area, all of these horrible vitriolic anti-Semitic flyers were left, hundreds of them, on the streets. It was done, we think, by this horribly anti-Semitic guy based in Petaluma, because it happened all over the Bay Area and in other parts of the country. It's a small group, but they have a lot of followers. And even if it's just 2 or 3 people riding around in the middle of the night, throwing out hundreds of flyers, that can be very frightening. So a lot of people in my congregation found out about it. Someone texted me right away in the morning. I heard from Jennifer Gonzalez, the police chief. She texted me, we're friends. And
a friend of mine, Hardy, found a bad.
Okay. So it was all over, and it was very disturbing. A lot of people in my congregation were very scared, particularly some of our older members, some of our parents, because of their kids. And Napa PD was great about it. They responded by having marked cars in front for a while. There's a local group, and I'm sorry I forget their name. Not Napa Moms, but it's a group that comes out when things like this happen. And they had a bunch of kids using colored chalk, write all sorts of inspirational notes. Do you know the group I'm talking about?
I don't.
In front of our synagogue, like, we love you, we're thinking of you. And it was really great. Hundreds of people were there. I got angry. I wasn't scared. I got angry. And the reality is anti-Semitism has always been with us. I'm not, I lived in New York for 20 years, so I wouldn't say I'm cynical, but I'm realistic. That rubbed off on me living there, even though I'm a Midwesterner. I don't think it's going to ever go away. And Jews need to be prepared. And I'm guessing, I think you said you were on the security committee.
Yeah.
We have that too. I mean, we've had to spend thousands more dollars improving the security at our campus, hiring an armed guard. Whenever we had a fundraiser last night, I'm friends with Mark, the guard who's there. That wasn't an expense. We're a nonprofit organization. We've had to spend thousands of dollars to protect our community, because that's just the age in which we live. And I know it's not unique to just the Jewish community. Churches have had shootings, schools have had shootings, but anti-Semitism is a unique phenomenon. And it is something we just need to be very, very vigilant about. The Anti-Defamation League and the FBI has been crystal clear that the last several years, there has been an increase of anti-Semitic incidents, whether violent, physically violent, or just things like this propaganda, far more than we've seen in many, many decades. So it's real. And what you can do as a congregation is, when something like this happens, and it'll probably happen again, reach out to any friends or neighbors of yours who are Jewish, just say you're thinking of them, maintain good relations like what we're doing right now. I'm going to have Pete speak at our synagogue next year. I have my sabbatical in about a year, but when he gets back from his sabbatical, I'm going to have him speak probably on a Friday night at our synagogue. So improve interfaith relations is something that's really important. And I think probably more important than anything, when you're with other people who utter anti-Semitic comments, call them out on it. Don't let them get away with it. And I don't know you. I don't know if you even have friends like that. But sometimes people make anti-Semitic or racist comments just in passing. They don't seem real serious. Don't let people get away with that. Call them out. Say, that's not okay. A Christian doesn't talk like that about Jews. Right. We're brothers. Right. And sisters. So I think those are some things you can do.
Yeah, it was kind of a scary thing to have had happen in such a small community like this. And I remember Pete talking about it when it happened. And I know that there was a group of people of interfaith people that gathered to kind of show support around the time of the incident, and hope we can continue to have that support for one another in a community as small and as close as this one. So did any questions come up, turning the floor over to you guys, during our discussion that you wanted to have us answer, or really Rabbi Niles to answer? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a little hard to hear, but I think you said you have a friend whose favorite holiday is Kol Nidre, and just talk about what it is. So
and maybe some of the other major ones too, since we
really
touched on Passover.
I mentioned how there are 3 ancient pilgrimage festivals in Judaism that all last a week, and they change from being week-long pilgrimages where people would bring sacrifices to the temple in Jerusalem to being more agricultural and have all sorts of different kinds of meanings. Passover is only one of them. The other 2 major holy day periods that are mentioned in the Hebrew Bible, in addition to Shabbat, the Sabbath, these are the main ones, are Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, and Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. And together, collectively, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are known as the 10 days of repentance, the Jewish high holy days. And today they are viewed as the holiest time in the Jewish year. I would imagine you get a lot of people here on Christmas and Easter. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are when a lot of Jews come out of the woodwork and come to synagogue. But Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, when Jews fast and we pray all day, and we practice introspection and look within to try to become better people in the year ahead. Because in the Jewish calendar, holy days begin at sunset, not with sunrise. We follow a lunar calendar, not a solar calendar. So Shabbat begins on Friday night. The Sabbath begins on Friday night, not Sunday morning, similar to Seventh-day Adventists in Christianity. So Kol Nidre is the night that Yom Kippur begins. Kol Nidre means all vows, and that's because there's a prayer we say during Kol Nidre called All Vows, but it really kicks off the Day of Atonement. It's a very powerful evening service. It's very uh, beautiful musically. I don't know why your friend likes it so much, but the music, especially the cantorial music, is very haunting. There's some very haunting spiritual music that makes it one of the most well-attended of our services. So that might be why your friend likes it so much, but it's probably because it's the most important, arguably the most important evening in the entire Jewish calendar. Good question.
Yeah. My wife would be mad if I didn't ask you about Purim.
Purim.
Yeah.
Well, Purim is a post-biblical holiday, just like Hanukkah is a post-biblical holiday. In the Bible, there's no reference to Purim because the story was written after the Bible. There's also no reference to Hanukkah because Hanukkah was post-biblical. And that story actually has historical roots. That's about a Jewish insurrection against an occupying power. But Purim is from the book of Esther in the Bible. It's part of the Christian canon as well, I think. And it's about an anti-Semitic, big surprise, about an anti-Semitic person in the Persian Empire named Haman, who wants to wipe out the Jewish people through genocide, and how a man named Mordecai and his niece, a beautiful woman named Esther, thwart his plans and save the Jewish people. It's funny, thinking of Purim, and that's what we celebrate on Purim, or Passover, with the celebration of liberation from Egypt. Some Jews say, you can break down all Jewish holidays, almost all Jewish holidays, into one basic idea. They tried to kill us, we survived, let's eat. I don't necessarily like that, but it's kind of funny. Sort of gallows humor,
Right.
I think I saw a couple other hands up.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, when Haman's name is mentioned, aren't we supposed to boo?
Yes,
Yeah.
in the Jewish liturgy, when we celebrate Purim at synagogue, when we read the story of Esther, whenever we recite the name Haman or Haman, you boo, you twirl these things called groggers that create noise. Some people even write the name Haman on their shoes and stomp up and down. And kids love Purim because, even though it tells a very dark story that ultimately ends in a positive way, whenever we read that name, it's, the room goes crazy. It's also the only holiday in all of Judaism that the rabbis say you are actually not only allowed to get drunk, you are obligated to get drunk. And you're supposed to drink so much, and I don't know if this is from the Mishnah or the Talmud, but you're supposed to drink so much on Purim. And Judaism, wine plays a very central role in Judaism. There's wine associated with Passover. There's wine associated with weddings. There's wine associated with the circumcision of a newborn boy.
And therefore, it's no surprise that it plays a big part in the Christian tradition too.
And it does. But on Purim, they say you're supposed to drink so much. You're supposed to be so happy about this happy ending to the story that you're supposed to drink so that you cannot tell the difference between Haman and Mordecai, the good guy and the bad guy. So that's Purim. From my perspective as a rabbi, it's not considered a major festival, and Hanukkah is not either. But because of popular culture, it's become a very well celebrated holiday.
Right. Other questions in the back?
I'm sorry, can I give a summary of what?
Of the 4 books in the back.
Oh, sure. which was also my attempt to be brash and bold and provocative. So if you want to learn more about Judaism and my approach to it, as well as my critique of the established Jewish leadership, you might want to buy that book. The other one is God at the Edge. I mentioned that one. That's the book where I share some of the experiences that I've had, where I've encountered God through uncomfortable experiences. But I also put it in the context of religious history, and I look at other Jewish and Christian and Muslim thinkers and what they have to say about the same experience. I mean, look at Catholicism. St. John of the Cross, he wrote a book called The Dark Night of the Soul, or it's actually a poem called The Dark Night of the Soul. I mean, he got it also. It's not a uniquely Jewish idea, to find God in the darkness. So that book really focuses on that. The other book is, my most recent one is called 8 Questions of Faith, Biblical Challenges that Guide and Ground Our Lives. And I look at 8 different questions from the Hebrew Bible. Jeremiah, why did I come forth from the womb? God in the Adam and Eve episode in the book of Genesis, what is this that you have done? Another several questions, or Cain and Abel, am I my brother's keeper? So I look at 8 major questions from the Hebrew Bible, and each chapter is sort of a meditation or a riff on the themes behind those questions. So with Cain and Abel, am I my brother's keeper? That chapter looks at the idea of responsibility. Jeremiah, in his pain, saying, why did I come forth from the womb? That chapter is sort of a meditation on mortality. And I bring in personal experiences. A lot of it relates to my own midlife crisis. I don't know if anyone's been through a divorce here. I talk about my divorce. I talk about other struggles. I talk about how we come out the other side, having one chapter close and one open. And I bring in writings from psychology and philosophy and literature. And then the fourth and final book, the fourth and final book is called Craving the Divine. I did that one with a Christian publisher, the Paulist Press. The others were with Random House and St. Martin's. I was pretty connected to the publishing industry back when I was living in New York. But that one is with the Paulist Press, and that one looks at the experience of being lost. And through interviewing lots of different people that I knew when I wrote it in New York, artists, therapists, homemakers, I talk about different struggles that people went through. I interviewed them basically, and how they were able to move from being in a state of confusion and perplexity and just feeling lost in their lives to, again, coming out the other side and being whole again and actually being even stronger and wiser. So those are some of the themes that I've really wrestled with. I would say Gonzo Judaism is the one I would pick up if you're interested in learning more about Judaism and my take on it. And the other 3, if you're more interested in personal growth, spirituality, and comparative religion. Thank you.
Cool. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Well, we've gotten through almost 45 minutes without talking about Israel, but I guess I can't get away with it without. Well, let me just start by saying I'm a Zionist. I lived in Israel for 2 years in Jerusalem, but that doesn't mean I agree with all of the policies of different Israeli governments. I don't agree with the policies of the last government we had here in the United States. I think you can be a patriot and still be very critical of your government. We've done that in this country for many, many generations. So I don't accept the critique that all criticism of Israel is anti-Semitism. I don't accept that because, I was very critical of the last Israeli government. I don't love everything that the current Israeli government is doing, even though it's much more of a coalition than the previous one, including with some Arab representation. But, however, I wouldn't go as far as some of my other colleagues. Some criticism of Israel, I think, is rooted in anti-Semitism. Not all. I think you can absolutely be critical of the Israeli government, and you should not be labeled an anti-Semite for that. It's easier for me to do it than for a Christian to do it, but some is. And I do feel that over the years, Israel has been singled out. Every government, every nation state is problematic. Mm-hmm. France, Germany, Japan, the Philippines, Hungary. Every nation state has policies that are problematic. That's just the nature of the beast. Every nation state, oppresses, wages unnecessary violence against others, has unjust ways of treating minorities. But I feel that in the United Nations, for example, Israel has been unfairly singled out over the years compared to other countries. I feel that some of the criticism of Israel in Europe and in North America, again, singles out Israel more than other countries who are doing equally problematic things, if not worse. So, I could go on and list some of the countries right now doing pretty terrible things that don't get statements against them at the United Nations. So I guess that would be my answer to the question. Not all criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic, because I'm critical myself, but some of it is. And I think it's just really important, again, to know that every country does problematic things. So to over and over again single out Israel for criticism, I don't think is fair, and may very well be rooted in anti-Semitism.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Well, that idea of the Jewish people being God's chosen people, in some ways, is actually a mistranslation of the original Hebrew. And I don't know if it goes back to the King James translation. I don't know. But the phrase that it's based on is actually Am Segula, which means treasured people, not chosen people. And the implication is not necessarily that the Jewish people are any better than any other people, but that the Jewish people, at least in antiquity, were the ones who introduced the idea of ethical monotheism to the world and moved it beyond idolatry and the other types of religious practices of the time. Now, a lot of people in the more liberal Jewish denominations like mine, aren't comfortable with that concept. I don't like that concept. I don't think I'm any more chosen by God than you are, or than anyone else is. I don't know a lot of Jews today. In fact, I don't know any, except one or two who are kind of crazy, who literally, and one belongs to the congregation, who literally think we're God's chosen people. I find it a problematic idea. But again, I also think it comes from a mistranslation of what the actual Hebrew was in the Torah.
I think I saw some other hands up. Anyone? Oh, Ann.
So I had a question about questions. So I remember as a child, as a conservative Christian, there were certain questions that were kind of off limits for asking of your faith. But I noticed that in Judaism, I remember in the Seder, there were lots of questions of the youngest attendee.
It's called the Four Questions. It's a section in the Seder called the Four Questions. Yep.
So what do you think is the importance of asking questions, and what do you think it gives to your faith?
That's a great question. I no pun intended. I think Judaism for the last 2,000 years has always been engaged in an ongoing relationship with the Bible, with our ancient traditions, to continue to make them relevant and resonant in our time. Judaism is not a static religion. It's not like everything got canonized, in the year 562 and everything looks the same ever since.
Right.
It's an evolving, ongoing religious tradition, at least my take on Judaism. I can't speak for those in the Orthodox or ultra-Orthodox community. We have our fundamentalists also. We have our biblical literalists also. I'm not one of them, but we do have that. But the majority of Jews who live in the West believe in that idea of Judaism being this evolving, ongoing commentary on our tradition, where every generation questions the generation before. Every generation tries to offer new interpretations of old traditions and teachings to make them relevant to ourselves, our children, our grandchildren. And this goes back to Scripture. Look at what Abraham does. Talk about audacity. And I talk about this in my book, Gonzo Judaism. God, who he has a very close relationship with, God wants to destroy the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, because they're so sinful. And Abraham, for those of you who are familiar with or not familiar with that passage, Abraham negotiates with him and challenges God. I shouldn't say him. Abraham challenges God. And he says, don't wipe out these cities. I mean, imagine the first Jew, this young person, the very first person to introduce this new religion, to have the audacity to challenge God, of all, and saying, what if I can find 50 righteous persons? And God says, okay, I won't wipe out the cities if you can find 50 righteous people. And then Abraham says, what if I can find 40? Or what if I can find 30 or 20? And eventually I think it's down to 10. And they can't even find 10 righteous people. But Abraham questions God. Abraham challenges God. So that idea of questioning authority, of challenging authority, of being provocative and audacious,
And wrestling with God.
of wrestling with God and wrestling with other institutions and power structures, in my opinion, that's Gonzo Judaism. That is what is embedded in our DNA as Jews. Questioning authority, challenging inherited traditions, not being afraid to step forward and speak our truths. I think that goes all the way back to Abraham. And that's why I think questioning is so important for us. It doesn't mean we question every single thing. I mean, you'd be paralyzed if you didn't accept certain things. But that's why, again, I think Judaism is a religion of dialogue, not a religion of doctrine and dogma.
Any last questions? Yeah.
I'm sorry? Well, I'm not sure what to say about Palestinians. What aspect? You mean just what life is like for them? Oh, so that's going to be our last question. I can only speak for myself. Again, I am a Zionist, but no, I don't think the situation of Palestinians is just. I think it's very problematic. I don't know that I would call Israel an apartheid state. I don't know if I'd go that far, but I think a lot of the policies of the last years and decades have been very problematic and unfair to Palestinians. I think more and more rabbis and Jews would agree with that statement, especially here in the Bay Area. I think, there are 1.5 million Palestinian Arabs who are citizens of Israel. I think it's a little better for them, but even with them, it's not perfect. So this is the challenge I have, and I guess I'll close with this. The challenge I have is, as a progressive Jew and as a progressive rabbi, how do I hold on to being a Zionist and yet also recognize and try to improve the situation of Palestinians living both in the West Bank and Gaza and in Israel? And I certainly don't have the answer to that, but you really do put, I just this morning I was reading about that. I mean, I would say read Thomas Friedman more than me if you want to gain more insight into that. But I think a lot of smart people have been trying to figure out this insoluble problem for many, many years. And they probably have better ideas than I do. But it's a problem. It's a very serious problem. And I do recognize the plight of the Palestinian people. And my dream, my hope, is for a two-state solution where Jews and Palestinian Arabs can live side by side, where both are safe and both are fulfilled and both are living just normal lives without worrying about each other. No, I taught a course on Zionism. Zionism is a very diverse intellectual movement. It started in the 19th century, along with a lot of other nationalist movements, like the movement for Irish independence was another 19th century nationalist movements. I believe I think Serbian nationalism was also in the 19th century. So there were a lot of these movements, and Zionism was one of them. You have left-wing Zionists, you have right-wing Zionists, you have lots of different Zionists who had all kinds of ideas of what the Jewish state should look like. And since 1948, it's now a reality. And there is a great deal of disagreement among Israelis about the direction Israel should go. There is a strong peace movement in Israel. There's also, people on the right. But no, I would not agree with the statement that Zionism is incompatible with protecting Palestinian rights.
Well,
but as it's lived out in the real world, certainly they're not doing a great job.
Well, you've been very, very generous with your time. So everyone, let's give Rabbi Niles a big round of applause. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
We'll go ahead and close today's service with the Lord's Prayer. So if we can go ahead and bow our heads, close our eyes. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those that trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen. Hope you guys enjoyed the discussion today. Thanks so much for coming. Have a great day.